Today we're going to talk about all of the things that you need to start pressure canning. So the first thing that you will need is the tanker. So you're gonna need a Denali Canning Pressure Canner, the tanker, and with it comes your weighted gauge. So you'll have a 10-pound and 15-pound gauge that also comes with the valve stem that it comes on. So each valve stem is different depending on the weight that you are using and putting on for your elevation. Inside of the canner, you'll have the rubber ring that is attached. That's what's gonna give you the seal. And then down here at the bottom that comes with it is a rack. You have to have a rack in order to pressure can. And it comes with your tanker, so you don't have to buy that additionally. But just so you know, when you do get your tanker, you need to make sure that your rack is at the bottom, or the tray, or whatever you want to call it, is at the bottom of your pressure canner before you turn it on. Some other things that you're gonna need to get started pressure canning is, of course, some Denali canning lids. These are wide mouth lids. So depending on your jars, if you're gonna use regular mouth jars, or if you're going to use wide mouth jars, you wanna have the appropriate lids for that. Denali Canning has a preserve lock seal inside of their lid on the rubber, which means that they are going to seal down perfectly. I rarely get a jar that doesn't seal, and so I really enjoy using these lids. You will also need to have some rings, some Denali Canning rings. Now, you can buy your rings and lids as a set, but once you have rings, you don't need to continue to re-buy them. You can just buy the lids in their own individual box and reuse your rings over and over again. If you've watched any previous videos, you will see that I don't store my jars with the rings on, and that's a safety step. So if you store your jars with your rings on, then they could potentially give you a false seal if your jars ever were to come unsealed. It's highly unlikely that your jars come unsealed once they've sealed down, but it does happen depending on temperature fluctuations, humidity, and that kind of stuff of where you're storing your jars. It has happened to me. Because I don't store them with my rings on, I knew right away that my jars came unsealed, and I just went ahead and tossed that food. Your ring is going to serve the purpose of holding your lid into place while it is in your canner. After that, and they've completely cooled down and sealed, they don't serve a purpose anymore. So you can go ahead and remove them and use them over and over again for different canning projects. I don't do more than probably 20 to 30 jars in a day, and so I don't need to store a ton of rings because I just keep reusing them. The last two things that you will need to begin to pressure can is a jar lifter. Now, you don't absolutely need this, but it does make your job a whole lot easier. So when you are lifting your jars out of the canner, be very careful, they're very hot. And so this helps you to not burn yourself. And then this little tool, this is what I use to stick down into each jar to get out any air pockets. I also use it to check my headspace and make sure that I have the appropriate headspace. So I highly recommend this tool. They usually come in a canning kit that you can get on Amazon or anywhere really. It's not necessary. If you don't have this, you can definitely start pressure canning without it. You can just use the back of a wooden spoon or anything really to get any air pockets out. You want to make sure if it's just a liquid form in your jar, you can just tap the jar a couple times and that usually releases any air pockets. If it's a thicker food, like a ready-made meal or beans or something like that, using something to stick down into your jars is definitely the way to go. Now that you have all of the supplies that you need to begin pressure canning, you are set to go. Find your favorite recipe, make sure that it is canning approved, and you are able to get going with your pressure canner. It is not scary using the Denali Canning Pressure Canner, the tanker. It is so easy to use, and really there's minimal steps involved. The biggest workload is prepping your food to put into your jars to get into the canner. You do want to make sure that you have off a whole afternoon or morning block of time, because no matter what canning project you do, it usually takes at minimum 2 to 3 hours, just because it takes time for it to vent, to build up pressure, then your processing time, and then to cool down. The good news is that with the tanker, you don't have to wait for it to cool down, because the longer it sits, the better. So as soon as your timer goes off, you can go ahead and turn your stovetop off, and if it sits for 5 hours, that's okay. But you wanna make sure that you give yourself enough time to be able to prep your food for it to vent, build pressure, and for the processing time. So these are all of the supplies to get ready to pressure can, and I hope that you get started.